Okay, today I'm going to show you how to knit a flat panel and change colors without having a mess of tails to knot and weave in. Now if you're doing a large flat panel and you're going all the way from start to finish on the Addi needles, you can switch this from round to plain knitting, and that'll prevent your machine from knitting all the way around in the circle. However, I'm not making that big of a panel, so I'm not going to switch it because it doesn't matter to me. Now, I did get Addi stoppers, little black stoppers with my machine. However, I do not even use them. You can use them, they're optional. All you do is clip them on the little red part here and it stops your needles from going past that point, so it'll bump into it and stop it from going. But I don't need it, I just pretty much watch where my yarn starts. You can start, if you start a flat panel and you're knitting all the way around, you'll start at the white needle. But pretty much you can start anywhere you want with a flat panel. You just need to remember, if you're making a pattern, that you write what needle you started on. I typically, for some reason, always start on the first white needle. That's just, no matter how far I'm going, if I'm only knitting a couple needles or all of them, I always start on the white one. I guess that's just the way I remember it. So, I'm going to start off with casting on. Now, this technique is only going to work if you are knitting 2 rows of the same color, because it's going to leave a little yarn, like strip of yarn. So if you're knitting a flat panel, it's in the edge. The whole philosophy behind this is, I'm starting with pumpkin, I'm going to work this way. So when I come back around, I can change colors. So this can work in like 2 or 4 rows, but it's got to be even because you have to come back, or else you're going to end up having to cut. And that's what we're trying to avoid. Alright, so I'm going to put my initial Alright, so now I'm casted on. Putting it on and going one way does not count as a row, and then coming back onto it is not a row. So from here on out, everything I do will be counted as a row. This was basically just casting on. Okay, so it's a little awkward fighting around the camera stand, because I typically hold my machine like this, and I use these fingers to push it down because I don't use the clamps. I like to be portable. So I just use my hands right here to push the machine down. And then I usually let the yarn just guide through my hand down here so I can feel tension and know if my yarn is hung up on something and not. It will knit tighter. If I keep tension taut on this, it's going to knit a tighter stitch, and it's going to struggle more through my machine. If I just let it free run extremely loose, it's going to knit extremely loose and my project will end up bigger. So I try to keep an even tension where it just flows through my hands and I'm able to tell what the difference is if it changes. Typically on a yarn roll, I pull from the center and I pull out pieces of it until the center opens up enough, pretty much about there, where it's got a big enough hole, and it just glides out. Once it starts gliding out, I don't do anything else, and I just let it run straight out of the center like that. Okay. So now I'm going to change my colors every 2 rows. Normally, I don't change colors that often, and because I avoided having to tie knots and weave in ends. It was super annoying, but I wanted more stripes. So I was finally fed up after making flat panels that look like this. So I decided to sit down and come up with a method that would help decrease the amount of knots and ends I had to weave in because it was a nightmare. And this is what I come up with, and I know it's not a new technique. I know, others know about it and others have done it, but I thought I'd make a video for those of us who are new to the Addies or just don't know the technique or are visual learners, because I'm a visual learner and I like to see stuff play out in front of me. I love YouTube for that reason. So here we go. And again, I do not have it on plain knitting. It's set on round, and I do not have stoppers on because I'm just going to watch. I can see my needle where it ends, and I can see where it begins, and I'm just going to keep track with my eyes. Alright. Here we go. I'm going to knit. I'm going to change every 2 rows. So this is going to be row 1. And this is row 2 coming back. Now, I'm not going to cut this. Typically I would, but that's how I'm going to get an end, and I don't want an end. So, just going to drop it. I'm going to grab my other color. I'm going to stick it in. Leave a little bit of a tail. This is going to be another tail. So this one right here is going to pull my, no, this is my working yarn. This one, if I wanted to pull it to make like a circle or gather it, this is going to be the one, because this is my original starting one. This is my working yarn that's still connected to my skein. And then this is my new color I'm introducing. Alright, so I'm going to go twice, because if I only go once, this would be row 1. If I only go once, I would have to cut this because it doesn't meet up. My working yarn is over here. So to change my color again, I would have to bring it all the way across the Addi. That's not going to work for my project. That'll look crazy and I'll end up having to cut it and knot it. So that's why it's the principle of even number of rows. So I come back for 2, and I'm going to change colors again. So I'm going to zoom in nice and close so you can see what I do. Okay, so I'm taking the gray out of the carriage. I'm just going to leave it on the side. Now, when you start changing colors, you're going to have to be mindful of your skeins because they'll start to kind of loop and wrap around each other. So you just got to kind of manage your skeins to make sure they don't get all tangled. Now I'm going to bring my working yarn, the orange, not the gray. Now see how they're kind of like a little bit twisted? I know you can't see it very well because I'm zoomed in, but I'm going to make sure I put the gray off all the way to the side and then bring the pumpkin up into the carriage. And again, I'm going to check to make sure it's not wrapped around my skein here. Okay, my skeins are all good now. And now, I didn't cut to change color. It's still there. And I'm just going to run 2. Now, the thing is this is a machine, and it's not going to run perfect 100% of the time. There's, obviously it has limitations, there's things you can't do on it, but you're gonna have times where your yarn gets caught, it gets a tuck stitch, you know, you accidentally went backwards and okay, so my camera keeps cutting out, and basically this is a machine and it's not going to work perfectly all the time, just like, you know, everything else in life. Sometimes it's gonna run beautifully, sometimes, you know, you're gonna have issues. You know, the machine's not defective because it doesn't catch a stitch on one needle at one time and you get a tuck stitch. That's okay. You make mistakes when you crochet by hand, you make mistakes when you knit by hand, when you loom. You know, having the Addi, you're gonna make mistakes as well. It's just a faster process to make a product. So you just have to keep that in mind and remember, if you make a mistake, it can be fixed. Even if you get it off of the needles and you have it in your hand, you can still fix it. Like, you don't have to rip your whole project apart that you've already spent 3 hours on making just because of a tuck stitch that's 20 rows down. You can fix it. And I have a video for that. But I just wanted to put that out there because I know a lot of you guys get stressed out and think you have to rip your whole project apart, and I just don't want you to do that. Okay, moving on. Anyway, we're knitting row 2, sorry, of the pumpkin, and we're coming back up to the gray. Again, gray working yarn, pumpkin still working yarn. I'm not going to take it out. You gotta make sure you knit all the way to the end. So because I started on the white, I'm gonna knit far enough to pull my black needle down and then come back. Now this is active and ready to go, so I'm going to pull my pumpkin color out of the carriage and bring my gray, making sure my yarns are not twisted. As you can see, they're not twisted. Put it in the carriage and then go 2 rows. Now, I'm going to zoom out so you can see what's happening to my pumpkin as I'm knitting the gray. Okay, so as you can see, my pumpkin is being caught way over here and it's just like pulling. That doesn't matter because it just comes right off. It can get hooked over here all at once because I'm not knitting that far, so it's not going to get knitted in or mess up my project. It's basically, as this is running, it's just like hanging on and gliding with it, but it's okay because you can just pull it off. No biggie. Alright, going back around. Now, if you do the minimal of stripes, because I said keep it even, so if you do 2, you're going to have the smallest gap possible. And that probably is not the right word for it, but it's the best word I can come up with right this second. But I'll show you what I mean. Now see, this one landed in my working area, so I'm just going to move it. Okay. As you can see, I still only have the 2 original tails I started with. One from casting on and one from changing the color the first time. So I'm going to do 4 stripes now, or 4 rows in 1 color stripe. That way we can see how big of a difference it is. So I've already done 2 in the pumpkin. I'm going to switch to gray and do 4 with the gray. sure I don't accidentally knit that. Alright. So there's one. There's two. There's three. There's four. Alright. And I'm going to change. I'll do four in the pumpkin as well. That's two. Three. And four. I'm going to do it again just to make sure I have a big enough of a area to show you. Now, as you can see right here, it's crossed. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my pumpkin skein and move it underneath the gray. So that way it's the top one now. They're not crisscrossed anymore. I'd rather fight the skeins than have to tie knots. Alright, set back up. I'm going to do four for this. As you see, I knitted all four without even fooling with the orange that was floating around and getting caught because it wasn't a big deal. It didn't affect what I was doing. Okay, I'll make sure I put, oops, sorry. Shake the camera, bump into it. Okay, and I'm going to do four of the orange. It's pumpkin actually. Oh, I keep calling it pumpkin. I better make sure that's what it is. Burnt pumpkin. One, two, three, four. Okay, and now I'm gonna cut because I'm finished. Now, you can cast off many different ways. There's lots of options. I'm just going to run a scrap string through it and cast off that way just because I'm showing you a technique and I'm not going to make a project with this. So, alright. I cast off like this a lot where I run a scrap string through. Just make sure you use a different color because it makes it harder to see if you're putting them on circular needles or trying to run your crochet hook through it. If you use a different color, it's easier to determine what are your active loops. Okay. Alright, see? We got our stripes. Alright, I'm going to zoom in so you can see really good. Okay, so here are my stripes. These were the 4 rows. And these are where we're alternating every 2. And it's super cute. I love how it turns out. Now this is the edge where we did not change. So this was our odd number of rows. This, as you can see, we only have 4 ends total. This end does not count because that's holding my loops on. So we only have a total of 4 ends. And they're both close to each other, so you can tie them, knot them, and loop them in. Way better than the other messes that we would have had. Okay, so as you can see here, this edge is different than this edge because we carried the yarn up, so there's like a little bit of a loop. Now when we switched and did 4, it makes more of an obvious because it's a bigger gap. So our working yarn, the pumpkin, had to travel a further distance when we did 4 rows to get to where we were going to use it again. So that's why there's a bigger piece of string here. Where down here it's a lot smaller because we only traveled 2 rows. So that's the difference when you decide to go bigger. So if you don't want a bigger loop on the inside here, then keep your row changes small. So every 2 will give you the smallest row change you can get without having to cut. So I hope this helped. I love striping and I just hated knotting and tying ends, so hopefully this video helps.